Welcome to this special edition fun panel that we put together over this weekend, or I guess over the holiday break, with the arrival of ChatGPT and a lot of the buzz that it's creating, a lot of the questions that are happening. I was very fortunate to know some amazing people, and I asked them, I said, hey, do you want to do a panel talking in your area of expertise about how ChatGPT is going to impact education in the immediate now and also kind of in the future? We have some really amazing people that are here with us today. I'll introduce them in a moment. I just want to really just thank everybody for taking your time to join us tonight. I know that there's a lot of excitement that's going around about this, and I don't think we're coming to any of this with like any hard concrete answers, as much as it's like some really passionate people who are talking about this and want to gain some insights with each other and be able to share those with other people as well. If you have comments, please put them in the comment section. We're going to try to get to those questions as we kind of go throughout. It's going to be kind of a pretty loose conversation, I hope, very conversational. I think I can say conversation a couple more times. Conversation. So go ahead and introduce yourselves, and I will introduce our panelists. First, we have Dr. Nina Huntemann. She is the educator with 25 years of experience in higher education and ed tech. She has focused her career on increasing access to education and student success. Currently, Dr. Huntemann is the Chief Academic Officer of Chegg, first of its kind, an online learning service provider, academic support for students worldwide. Prior to joining Chegg, she was the VP of Learning at edX and a tenure professor at Suffolk University in Boston, Massachusetts. We also have Dr. Lindy Ledohowski, who was an English teacher and a professor before co-founding a company called EssayJack, an academic writing software platform that was acquired by Canadian edtech company Wizeprep, where she now serves as the Chief Operating Officer, COO. And we also have Dr. Ravit Dotan, who is a subject matter expert in AI ethics and is active in the academic, private, and nonprofit sectors. In the academic sector, she directs and collaborative AI responsibility lab at the University of Pittsburgh. In the private sector, she's a responsible AI advocate to the Bria.ai, a generative AI startup. In the nonprofit sector, she is an AI ethics implementation lead at the Women in AI. Her background is in the philosophy, and she earned her PhD at UC Berkeley. I asked a couple questions to ChatGPT, so let's give a little intro to ChatGPT. I asked it to introduce itself, and it says, ChatGPT is a powerful natural language processing model developed by OpenAI. It generates realistic, convincing human-like text and can be used for tasks like language translation and generation, as well as real-time, quote, chatting with users. ChatGPT has many potential applications, including customer service, language learning, content creation, and in our case, education. I think some really fun things to really point out before we bring people on to kind of set the stage. ChatGPT right now is available access for free. That does not mean that it is free to use. Oh, yeah. Oh, Nina's told me to introduce myself too. Hi, everybody. I'm Eric Stevens. I am a ed tech enthusiast, and I love AI and writing and all those things. And I've built a community with Translate Academia and Higher Ed. And I'm very humbled to be able to be here and share these wonderful voices with you. So thank you for reminding me about that. Before we bring on people, something I want everybody to know, just in case you don't know it, ChatGPT costs about $3 million a day to run. It's not going to be open forever, or it's not going to be free forever. So this is really a really exciting time to be talking about these things and what's going on, because it's not going to be like the way that it is the whole time. So let's be talking about what it is now. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring everybody on the screen. So here we go. We have Nina and Lindy and Ravit. Thank you so much for being here and for taking a part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thanks for organizing, Eric.
This is so exciting. Okay, all right. We're just going to say hello to some people right here. We're going to say hi to Jennifer Roberts and Travis Kramer and Susan Dove and Valerie Schreiner. Thank you for all being here. So we're going to go ahead, and I want us to kind of kick us off with our first question. And this, we're going to kind of go in the order that I see you on my screen. So Lindy, I would love to get your response on this, and then Nina, and then Ravit. So I want to know everything you've seen just so far in the past few weeks. What is the thing that you have found to be most fascinating with the application, or just like, what is it that is just so cool? So go ahead, Lindy, tell me more.
So I could spend a lot of time talking about what is most fascinating, because I think there are a number of different elements, but I'll come at this from somebody who has spent her life kind of teaching, writing, academic writing, thinking about academic writing and the intersection between academic writing and technology in my most recent life. And I find that what ChatGPT does that's really fascinating in this is that it streamlines some of the routine elements of writing. So being able to craft a summary or very briefly provide context. And those are pieces of academic writing that students often struggle with. And then they never get to the more complicated pieces, which is that critical thinking and the analysis of text and all of that, because they get mired in just trying to summarize what the historical event is or what the play is actually about. So I find that it's fascinating that technology can intervene in some of those more standardized pieces of writing, which can really then allow for instructors and students to engage in the more difficult components of writing. So I find that part fascinating.
Thanks, Lindy. Hey, everybody. I'm so glad you're all here and you're spending this evening or morning or afternoon with us. It's really thrilling to see that a lot of people who have attended and introduced themselves come from education. And that's really the community that I know Eric has cultivated and I'm particularly interested in talking to. So glad to see you all here. Like Lindy, there's a lot of things that I'm finding really fascinating about ChatGPT and about generative AI generally. I think people in the audience may have also been playing with DALL-E, maybe even with Stable Diffusion and other kinds of generative AI that have come onto the commercial scene. So I'll take it up a level from ChatGPT. And what I'm really just finding about this moment in AI is it's really really forcing a conversation about the nature of knowledge, the purpose of knowledge generation. And as someone who spent 25 years in higher ed and now ed tech, that's one of the core things that universities are for, the role of creating knowledge through research, disseminating knowledge through teaching, and assessing knowledge through examination and certification. And so I think this moment, as we've seen in a lot of articles and blogs and Twitter chatter, this is really a sort of provocative moment for universities to be thinking about, or higher ed to be thinking about, the purpose of what they do and how they do it in an age of AI. And there's a lot more to say about that, both during this conversation and in subsequent conversations. But I find what it's provoking, it's provocative conversation, to be among the most fascinating.
Obviously, I'm gonna be on mute. Okay, it's my turn. So first of all, I want to say hi. It's really good to be here. I think I don't have the technical ability to write comments in the chat. I was gonna put the link to my LinkedIn page. So find me on LinkedIn. I just love conversations about AI ethics. So feel free to connect with me there. And then to the question, what is most fascinating to me about ChatGPT? It's related to what Nina just said. I'm really fascinated by the someone put thank you. Someone put my link in the comments. Thank you. Probably Eric. Thank you, Eric. Okay, yeah. So what I find most fascinating is actually related to the last point that Nina mentioned. It is the social response to AI. And for me, I first got personally exposed to AI about 10 years ago. I was working in this company that does computer vision, and they were building a machine that would sort flowers automatically. So you would put in a flower and it would figure out like how many buds does it have, like what kind of flower is it? Like, does it need to go in the trash? Does it does it need to go to like the store? I was like, okay, this thing. And yet in the general public, there wasn't as much awareness to what this technology is and kind of impact it already has on us, really, I think, until now, with the explosion of DALL-E and then with ChatGPT. Like, all of a sudden, I'm hearing conversations about this everywhere. I'm really fascinated by why did this happen now? Why is it ChatGPT that did it more than DALL-E, for example? And I'm it makes me energized and excited to see more conversations about a topic that I really think we should be talking more about, which is how this thing is impacting us, and what could we do to make sure that we harness this technology in the best way possible, and don't fall into various kind of pitfalls that humanity has found itself in the past with technology.
I like the combination of the things that we're talking about, this idea of like provoking thought, right? And like asking us to be looking at things in ways that we haven't ever before, and just the idea of just streamlining creation itself. I was watching an interview with Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, and he was talking about when people are afraid of AI, they think that it's going to come for the labor jobs, and then it's going to like progress and progress and progress until the last thing that's going to take over are those creative jobs, because you can't replicate creation. And he's like, what we're seeing is this the exact opposite of that. That with DALL-E and with ChatGPT and with these other programs, the things that we kind of hold dear to us as humans, the ability to create, is now suddenly we can outsource in a completely different way, which has some pretty also some scary implications, I think, as well. So let me ask this: what, like we've been talking about some of the exciting things that we have. I want to ask this question though before we go in. Like, are there any other thoughts that like you want, like about that excitement, like why it's so exciting? Like, why should people be excited about this? Because I believe this is like a game changing moment, right? And back to Ravit's question, like why ChatGPT right now? Like why? I don't think they even anticipated the hype that they're getting. Why should people be so excited? Let's start, Nina. Let's start with you this time, and then Ravit, and then Lindy. So, like, we're personally excited, but like, why should the world be paying attention to this right now?
Well, I think I'll answer a pre-question before I answer why we all should be excited. I think there's a good reason why we're all excited right now. And I'm putting on a hat that I've learned from a lot of my colleagues at my time in ed tech. What ChatGPT did that was really smart, or I should say what OpenAI did with ChatGPT that was really smart, and certainly what DALL-E has done, is that the interface is so easy to use. And that's why we saw, and of course, it's currently free. So that's why we've seen such quick dissemination of it. People can literally get their hands on it and do something with it. So never underestimate a really good UX design to just make something take off. And then, why is it all exciting right now? We've been talking, like if you think about science fiction, other moments in the development of AI that we've seen, that we've been almost building to this moment of like, okay, when is it really just going to make our jaw drop? And I think this is the moment where, because of its ease of use and access and its power, it's this jaw-dropping moment, finally, after years and decades of kind of a buildup. But I think that my AI expert colleagues probably have a more scientific explanation than mine.
Ravi, do you want to jump in?
I'm actually still pondering. If you want to go first, I'm happy to just say stuff, but also if you want to go, you could go.
Okay. All right. I'll save you till the end, and so you can ponder. And I want to kind of pick up again a bit on the sort of zeitgeist moment that Nina was talking about, because so part of it is I absolutely agree, ease of use interface, but also I think we can't underestimate the experience that many of us have had in education and workplace settings for the past few years with remote learning, remote work. And so our experience has ramped up the importance of written communication, whether we're sending messages through Slack or internal messaging and a lot of our communication has happened in various forms of writing. And so people have felt the pain of that kind of writing, whether it's routine writing that everybody has to do a one pager, or like there are these pieces of writing that are required of us more and more than ever before, because we can't have, or we couldn't have, those casual conversations regularly. So documentation, I think, rose to the fore in a written form. And so I think a lot of people felt the pain of that, particularly as well for people who struggle with written communication, whether it's because of language barrier or for whatever other reasons where writing in English isn't something that's super easy, and now suddenly you have to do it all the time without the kind of informal supports in person that you might have had, where you could like go to your friend's desk and be like, oh, could you just help me with this? Or like, oh, does this make sense to you? Now you couldn't do that. You had to have something in writing to send to somebody and say, does this make sense? And so I think being able to just quickly type something in ChatGPT, write me a script for, or write me a memo, or is I think very empowering for people who are at this particular moment in time coming off of feeling the pain of some of those writing tasks in a way that maybe they hadn't in a kind of pre-pandemic moment. That's a guess I have.
Okay, okay, so there are 3 questions that I'm hearing here. So I'm just gonna name them, and then maybe I'll just address some of them. One question is like the question that, like, why now? Why this? Another question that Eric asked is, why should people be excited about this? And then yet another great question that Eric asked is, why should people care? Why does it matter? Why should I come to this webinar? Like, why should I talk about this? I want to address the 2 latter questions. Let's start with why should people get excited about this? I'm going to tweak it. I don't know why they should be excited, but I can say why I'm excited, what makes me excited. And I think maybe what is in fact making people excited. I don't know. I only know about myself. But the capabilities that this thing has, honestly, it blows my mind. Like, for me, I guess I'm a visual person. The visual generative AI really impacts me. So I don't know if DALL-E can do it, but some other company that I work with, they can do it. I could take an image. It could be an image of me with this lovely wall that we all know and love. And I want to replace it with something more exciting. I want to make it a conference room with blue chairs. I could literally take my photo. I could replace my background with office space with blue chairs. That's what I will get. So these are things that I thought were impossible. And so it's just, I get excited by these technologies because they do things that seem like magic. That is what's so appealing to me. And they seem like magic because I thought it was impossible. So that gets me really, really excited. And I wanna lean into the other question of why should people care about this? I guess this is a narrative that I'm gonna repeat. As exciting as this technology is, if we're not careful, it's gonna be devastating. And I think what this magic feeling in itself can be devastating because it hides behind it how this thing actually works. When I hear people talk about, oh, ChatGPT could replace experts, I'm like, what? They don't understand how it works. That's where it's coming from. So I think every person who feels that, marvel, that magic, I would encourage them to be inquisitive and figure out, this is exactly the time. How does this work? How can it impact us? Especially given that the regulatory landscape is a mess. We really need voices of people saying, hey, this is not the Wild Wild West. Let's not make it that thing. So, yeah.
I think this idea of ease of access, just like how easy it is to get there, and how important language has become in our everyday lives, right? Like it makes sense that this thing is just getting the traction that it is. It's so like I've been talking to about everybody, like whether I'm at the gym or the bar or talking to my friends from I haven't seen forever. I'm like, have you heard about ChatGPT? And like just the other day, I was like, he's a financial lawyer. And I said, like, have you heard about this thing? And he said, no. And he texted me this morning. He said, I asked it an obscure question about the law and interpreted the question the same way that I would as my understanding of it. And what people are so afraid of is that it's gonna ruin literacy. But we also need to realize that it doesn't work without a certain level of literacy, like the ability to ask questions in a particular way, to really dissect and to get to the meat of what this thing can do. But then also understanding that there are some implications Like there are things that we need to consider. Let's talk about some of those things. Like, what are some of the things that we're like, this is a problem that we're going to be seeing. Let's see. Does anybody feel like they want to jump in and go first? I know, like in our pre-talk, let's start with the ethicist, right? So Ravit, let's talk about it. Let's go.
I don't know how I
say?
feel about being called an ethicist. Is it like worse than being called a philosopher? Who knows? Okay, here's something that's really troubling to me. In the old days, like 2 months ago, if you wanted to get information about something, you would Google it. You would go to, for example, Wikipedia. You would go to other kinds of sources. When you would Google it, you would have like a bunch of results. You might go into some of them. You would be critically thinking, do I believe this thing? Where is this information coming from? Is this a lie? Is this misinformation? Is this not well-based? If I care very much, I might even go to the Wikipedia page. I might even look at some of the links. But I am using my critical thinking. I'm taking this information and I'm like, what do I think about this? I do not take it for granted as the truth coming from in philosophy, it's like the light of reason shines upon you. I don't take it as that. I take it as like, oh, this is a thing that a random dude wrote on the internet. And I will evaluate it. And yet, when people get results from ChatGPT, somehow that critical thinking goes out the window. They'll say, oh my God, this is what ChatGPT says. Instead of Googling, I'll go to ChatGPT. I guess we don't need experts because we have ChatGPT. So all of that critical thinking is somehow disappearing because I think it might be because people don't really understand how this works. And so that's one angle of it. And ChatGPT says things that make sense. At the same time, it spits out nonsense, but we let our walls down. And so people cease to have this distinction, like, is it valuable or is it nonsense? They just like accept everything that's said to them. And the other side of this, we have to remember where this information is coming from. ChatGPT goes over like scraping their internet, taking other people's things, whatever. Let's put that aside for a minute. But it's giving us regurgitated versions of information that it found in the internet. Not every opinion is going to be on the internet. It narrows things down. It is effectively, it could be a really effective tool to marginalize voices who are already marginalized because they're not going to be as influential to like the training of ChatGPT. So we're going to hear them less if we keep listening to this, keep making something of it that it is not. So just to summarize what I said, two things that worry me. Somehow there's this effect of letting down our guard of critical thinking, and one consequence of that could be disinformation, and the other is continued and exacerbated marginalization of people who are already marginalized.
Yeah, I think this is a common thing that we're already dealing with, and it's just now being exacerbated by ChatGPT, is that people are already very trusting of the information that's presented them without any critical thinking, kind of going beyond that. All right, let's keep going with this idea of like what we're finding troublesome. Nina, and then let's go to Lindy.
I think my comment just elaborates a bit on Ravit's and puts it sort of in the classroom. So one of the things that concerns me about it, which is really, again, just a variation of what Ravit said, when I was using it, and a lot of people have been doing this, you ask it questions and you get an answer back and you're like, well, that's not quite right. So you change your question, or you try to amend your question to get a better answer. Well, that's because I'm a subject matter expert in what I'm asking. And so I can recognize when it's not accurate. And so when I put the lens of an educator on, students are usually novices. And so their engagement with it, they may not have the knowledge to know if it is incorrect. And I think to what Ravit said, part of the magic is the authoritative voice, right? It's grammatically correct English, which in and of itself is an interesting bias, maybe we'll talk about. And it speaks in an authoritative tone, if you will. And that is read in this magical way as being a source of truth, the light of reason, as you said. I think that there are ways to address that, though, and I don't want to sort of preempt the questions that we're going to engage with later, but there are times in history when we have been awed by technology, and there are ways to grapple with that maintains our critical thinking and maintains our reason. And I think this is the moment where it is absolutely important that we're developing those practices, and particularly those practices for students who are encountering this technology. I'm a little bit dismayed to hear that some school systems are already banning or barring or blocking, I should say, blocking the technology from classrooms and devices. And I have some sympathy. I understand why. The school year is starting now, and it's going to take some time to create policies and practices and help teachers get educated in how to use it in the classroom. So I think that will come, and it's maybe an understandable reaction right now, but I certainly don't think it is a good long-term reaction. We need to go back to, again, developing the tools in students about how they should be engaging and being critical of the technology, and then using it in ways that advance their learning.
Yeah, and I'll speak briefly on this because I agree with everything that has been said in terms of what's troubling, what's worrying, what keeps me up late at night with respect to ChatGPT. And again, it's that sleight of hand that is performed with that magic UI and that authoritative voice that is taking the conventions from writing that we have traditionally relied upon to mean that is a resource that can be trusted, and it's using all of those sort of technical and rhetorical tricks to give us a sense of comfort at information that is at times flat out inaccurate, at times radically superficial, and almost always informed by the biases that shape the materials that were used to train the model. And that's one area where often in generative AI and in tech more broadly, it's easy to leave out edge cases in creating whatever model it is that you want, because you want to get pattern recognition for the majority of cases, the things that most people will run into, and build on that. But in my mind, often where the most interesting critical thinking happens, the most interesting complications and nuance of the human experience happens in these liminal border spaces, the spaces that are somewhat unclear, that don't fit patterns that are going to be repeated again and again and again, that the technology will then be able to replicate. And so it's in those interesting outside spaces, or as Ravi was saying as well, like the marginalized voices also occupy those spaces. So I think the flattening of that is something that's troubling. And then just one final issue that I think also plays into the kind of magic sleight of hand that we're seeing is that we're also at a moment in time where fake news is rampant. We've lost the ability to distinguish between all of those sources. So Ravid, as you were saying in the beginning with the example, I can Google and I can go to Wikipedia. I might even go to Google Scholar if I'm feeling really fancy to find something that's a little bit more reliable. But for many consumers of information that they find on a screen, it appears all flat. So a reputable peer-reviewed journal article visually appears the same as some random dude's post. They are both on, black text, printed nicely and on a nice page. And I think we're finding now that some of that has already dulled our ability to be incredibly critical when it comes to what we are being fed from these flat two-dimensional screens. Whereas again, back in the olden days, there's a difference between a periodical or a book you checked out from the library and a newspaper article that made your fingers change color because it was on cheap newsprint. And those kinds of differences in a very material way expressed also different kinds of quality and authority of the information being presented, which is now lost in the digital world, which is fine that it's lost. But I think to go back to it, how do we then engage instructors and students in being critical consumers of digital texts, including digital texts that have this magic component of authoritative AI that seems creative and believable and is really fun to use.
I'm trying really hard to stay composed because people are watching, but I'm kind of like bouncing up and down in my mind because to me, like this idea of what's happening with our critical thinking and just being awed by the technology that is being presented to us, especially and I love the idea of genre and form, like the way that it looks credible, like it's not like a weird website with wonky wallpaper on the background. And whenever I'm talking to people who are very cautious about ChatGPT, I always this is my go-to anecdote is that Plato, the philosopher, did not like the introduction of the alphabet for a lot of the same reasons that we're discussing today. Not like getting into like environmental impacts of the alphabet necessarily. I don't know, maybe he did, but I think that now I think what a lot of people would want to know right now coming into this next year, and like we can I'm going to skip a little bit of a question. I want to know like this question right here of how is this going to be transforming the way that students learn and the way that teachers teach. These are going to be really, and just like we said, it's like the introduction of the searchable library from a computer versus the little index cards, right? Like this fundamentally changes the way that we approach knowledge. What are some of the things that are going to change? And then after that, we're going to kind of talk about what are some of the best practices that we might instill as we're kind of like going about it. So we're going to be kind of like juggling those things, like how is it going to change? And then second part is some of the best practices, perhaps. Let's see. Nina, would you like to start us off this time? And then we'll go to Lindy and then Ravit.
So our conversation obviously is grappling with some of the real challenges and what can be dark or troublesome about ChatGPT. But on this question, I get really optimistic and I get really excited. So, as I've mentioned, I've been in higher ed for 25 years. I've done a lot of faculty development. I've helped universities transform their learning into online spaces. And at the core of all of that is really, whether you're putting it online or it's hybrid or it's in person, really what one should be attending to is like, what is it do I need my students to learn, to know, or to do, and how am I going to get them there? But I think, unfortunately, even though we know a lot about how students learn and how the brain works and so forth, a lot of those best practices in learning science and cognitive science and educational research, they don't actually get practiced in the classroom much. And I'm not trying to go off on a tangent here, but there's been so many moments over the past 10, 20, 40. I read a really great book recently about the history of the professor. And I will remember it, of course, in another moment, but I'll tell you all what it is when I do. And they were talking about really calls for teaching to change like 100 years ago. And yet there's not a lot that looks all that different between a college classroom 50 years ago and one today. So I get excited because like maybe this is the tipping point. This is fundamentally provoking questions, as I said earlier, about the nature of knowledge and how it's created and disseminated and assessed. And those are the core things that universities do. So I'm kind of giddy with excitement that this might be some kind of tipping point to really change how we teach and students learn, and for the better. All this conversation about the need for critical thinking and to move beyond some of the mechanical and get into the process, those are all the things that have been needed in education for so long. And so this is where I get excited.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here because I too get really excited by the possibilities. I think, so I've long believed that we should let technology do what it does really well to free up time, space, and energy for people to do what they do really well. And so if there's something that a technology can do, we don't need to, because that's the way it was always done in the past, we don't need to necessarily continue reproducing that. And that's kind of one of my pedagogical philosophies. And so I believe in a kind of tech forward pedagogy. And I think ChatGPT can certainly play a role in that. But I think back to, when I very first was entering the classroom as an English teacher some 20 plus years ago. And back in the day, what was the new thing that was changing what was happening in English classes was this thing called Google, where students could just go and Google the meaning of a poem or Google the theme of a book. And there was a lot of hand-wringing amongst English educators at the time, sort of how do we preserve our own expertise in the face of this easy and quick access to some of these kinds of bits of information. And I remember, and so some of my students would come and they would say, oh, we're not allowed to Google this in our other classes. Are we allowed to Google this in your? And I said, yes, I want you to bring, search whatever you're searching, bring it to class. Let's talk about it, because that's the part that you need help with. You need help figuring out what's a good source, what's a bad, everything that you're finding. And then that's the same with ChatGPT. I get worried, as Nina was saying, with some of these school districts and boards who are starting to block access already. I understand where it's coming from, but it creates this sense that this is cheating and it's a hack, and we need to be on guard against it, as opposed to say, okay, well, we as the educators are going to help walk you through how to use this new technology. What are its pitfalls? What are the things that it misses? Now, the only thing that I would say in that, so I'm super excited about that possibility of being able to say, okay, here's how we can use it, and here's how we can raise questions in the classroom. Of course, I also recognize that that does take a bit of time. It's a big ask to expect professors and teachers to suddenly have a very robust pedagogy that incorporates responses to ChatGPT, which is changing very, very, very fast. And so that, I think, is it's both exciting because it can also challenge the pace of what we do in contemporary classrooms, but it's also, I think, a bit unfair because there doesn't seem to be the ability for organizations to meaningfully lead critical thinking and engagement on something that's moving very fast. Because, of course, to engage critically, to think about incorporating something into one's pedagogy involves a bit of thought. It takes a little bit of time to do it well.
Yeah, my thoughts are in the same direction. I want to maybe add another lens on something very similar. Every time with technology, the skills that we need educators to teach, they change. We have calculators now. I don't actually need to do summation. I don't need, it's good that I technically know how to do long division, but I'm never going to do it. I just know it in theory, but actually I'm going to use a calculator. And so when some inventions break out, it means that certain skills are no longer, they don't need to be the focus anymore of teaching. It happened to many skills. And I wonder, what does it mean for writing? There are actually a lot of positives in people being able to articulate themselves in ways that sound, everything is like authoritative, because writing style, indeed, it communicates, trust me. And people who have not been trained in ways that allow them to pick that up are now stuck because they're not able to articulate what they want to say in ways that are respected. So it can be an equalizer. And maybe this was a bit of a tangent, back to the main point. So I just wonder it's not what will happen to the skill of writing. Is that a skill that we need in the same way that we needed in the past? It's not necessarily a bad thing if we don't. And centering myself again on this question, how will this transform teaching? I also deeply think that teaching should change. A lot of the assignments. So, my background is in philosophy. That's the discipline that I spend most time on. A lot of the assignments, the vast majority of the assignments are read this thing, report something to me about this thing. Like it could be something critical, like it could be like an objection or like whatever, but it's basically also show me that you've read it, show me that you understood it. And it's not that it's not important, but there's something really important, in my opinion, gets lost when this is the majority of the assignments. It's the perspective of the student, because students, when they go to universities, definitely when they go to philosophy, there's something that they're looking. There's an itch. There's an itch that they need to scratch. They're not really getting to scratch it as much as they could, because the assignments are often report to me some information that you've heard from me in class, or report some information that you've read from Plato. It's just like say a thing about it. I think if the assignments and the whole teaching style shifts more to, hey, student, you are already like a complete individual. You have your perspective. Take this perspective as a starting point. Say something about the world from this perspective, like make it more personal, make it something. Yes, you could get some information from ChatGPT, but that is not the point. The point is, again, like my discipline's philosophy. So what are your questions? What are those things? Like articulate your point of view rather than repeating some things that some other people said. I think to me, it's like one of the greatest frustrations that I've encountered in higher education, that there isn't enough focus on those things. And I could hope that ChatGPT could push for more of that.
Okay. There's so many fun things happening in the comments while we're having this amazing conversation. And so I just want to like shout out some of the cool things that are happening in the comments right now. And then kind of continue, like I want the conversation to go off of one of the questions that was asked. And for our audience, this is going to be, I'm going to put a little scrolling thing. If you have any questions that you would like us to address as a panel, we have our last 15 minutes is going to be kind of dedicated to that as we kind of wrap up this question about what are some of the best practices and talking about some of the things that are happening right now. So far we have, this is Tatiana, who says, I get excited about the possibilities of using ChatGPT to scaffold the development of student writing skills. Imagine what co-creating with AI might look like. To me, this is, as a writing teacher, this is what I find to be the most fascinating. Like assignment number one, go tell ChatGPT to create an essay of an opinion that you oppose. And then your job is to go research it, like go support it, right? Like there are so many ways that we can invite, like I've already used ChatGPT as my critical thinking soundboard. Saying like, I want to do this and I want to do it in this way. Is that a thing? And then it gives me an answer and I have to think about what they say. If we can incorporate ChatGPT as a process of revision, then that's just a beautiful thing. Over here, where are some other ones that I wanted to throw up here? This one right here is from Ava. I'll be using ChatGPT in my films and TV business practices course starting next week. I can't wait to show students all the ways to harness this revolutionary innovation. As well, I believe students and I will have deep conversations with students about the ethics of it. Yeah, that's what it kind of says right there too. And there's a wonderful creator named Brittany who is on LinkedIn, and I've really enjoyed watching her explore these technologies because she, like me, she identifies as neurodivergent, and so like some of those things are difficult to do, but with these tools, we have the ability to express ourselves in such different ways, and it's just so exciting. Okay, and then right here, I just want this to kind of be, let's be the kickoff into let's do this before we kind of bring in start questions from the audience, because this right here is going to kind of go along. Like if you could say, like, if there's one thing that you would be doing in the classroom right now, what would you be doing with ChatGPT, especially with like this question, like of engaging critical thinking? Lindy,
Well, I was going to say, I will jump in because I'm super glad that you pulled out Tatiana's comments from the chats, because if you didn't, I was going to, because I agree. I think being able to sort of play back and forth. So in the intro, you mentioned EssayJack, the academic writing software platform that I developed that was then acquired by Wizeprep. And the principle of the EssayJack platform that has its new life as WizeWriter is that it asks interrogative prompts, because the academic writing act is a communicative act, which is often lost when we're just staring at a blank screen and typing things. And now ChatGPT has kind of put that on steroids, where as you are thinking about the different component parts of any sort of a piece of writing. It doesn't have to be, because I agree with you, Ravi, that some of the formal forms of writing are maybe a bit outmoded or a little bit performative in some ways. But I think being able to use ChatGPT in an iterative writing process to have an interlocutor that you are engaging with that is challenging you, but then you go back and challenge it. And so, Eric, as you were saying as well, using it to get ideas, to brainstorm, but then you have to go and do the research. Can you find an alternative perspective to something that ChatGPT has presented to you? Can you find the research to support it? Can you find alternate research? Those are all kind of activities that I would find really fun to do in a classroom with writing and engaging critical thinking skills, and also introducing research methodologies in real time in sort of fun ways that still captures the sense of magic and that can reintroduce some of the adventurousness to knowledge creation that that gripped me as a young person when I had to go to a library and you had to like hunt down knowledge in the stacks somewhere, and it smelled funny, and there were other books beside the one that you actually found that you wanted, and some of that gets a bit lost. But I think this magic and excitement and the interactivity can recreate some of that in the classroom. And again, I think that would be sort of a really invigorating way to ensure that students get that critical thinking skill and aren't just performing, I read this and here are some thoughts that I'm giving back to you.
One thing I would offer folks in the room that I think is an applicable framework here, I mean, at least it's a place to start. When I was teaching full time, my discipline was media studies. And one of the core principles that I taught my students was media literacy. I mean, I wanted them to come to my classes or leave my classes at the end of the semester saying, Professor Huntemann, I can never watch television the same again. And I'm like, yes, I've done my work here. Because I want them to see it differently than they had been seeing it. And I felt my goal was to help them understand how it's created. What are its tropes? What gets included? What doesn't? Who gets to be an actor on the screen? Who doesn't? Who gets to hold a camera? Who doesn't? How are scripts iterated on? What's decided upon? What gets on TV and what doesn't? Those are all sort of basic questions of media literacy. And Ravid talked about this already. I would encourage those of you who are looking for some frameworks for engaging in conversation with your students about ChatGPT to use a media literacy framework. It asks questions like, who made this? By which I mean, look into OpenAI. Who funded OpenAI? What is the technology behind it? What is the sort of like, development structure of companies and VC money and investors and all that behind it? What is the technology itself? You don't have to get super technical, but understand what a language model is and how it is, how the data used determines what it is capable of doing. So that would be one sort of practical framework to maybe use. And there are other interrogative questions that you can bring into the classroom to get students to understand what ChatGPT is, not just what it does.
Yeah, I wanna add to that. I really like this question. I'll just repeat the question. How can we best encourage students to use their critical thinking with so many answers at their fingertips? This is an opportunity. We already, even before ChatGPT, had so many answers at our fingertips. Many of them are going to be misinformation. Many of them are going to be disinformation. In fact, we are already in a situation where we don't really know what to trust. That is a great opportunity to talk about this with students. Which sources do you trust and why? And I liked the point before, I forget which one of the other speakers made it, but about Google at the beginning. I'm sure similar conversations has happened. The fact that someone has written something on the internet does not make it true. And I think today we're at a place of having these conversations again. And this is an opportunity for critical thinking. Which sources do you trust and why? And it extends to technology. ChatGPT is not the only one that creates text. Should we trust it? Why? Let's understand how it works. So I think that's one opportunity for critical thinking that's related to something that it would be good to do as educators anyway, given the amount of mis and disinformation that we're dealing with. And the second way for critical thinking, one of the things that worries me about ChatGPT, suppose, for the sake of argument, that ChatGPT is an expert that says always only things that make sense. So what? We, in fact, have multiple experts on the same topic. This is just a thing that happens in the world, and it is good. And it is good when they disagree. We like having multiple experts. We train them every year. They go to universities. We give them PhDs because it is good to have multiple experts that disagree. Even if ChatGPT is an expert, it is one, if it is an expert, it is one of many, many experts. It is good to compare between things that experts say. And so one way to use critical thinking when engaging with ChatGPT is, get two papers that disagree. Ask GPT a question of the same topic. Show the students it is just one opinion, if you call it an opinion, out of many. We can engage with it critically as we would with any other piece of text.
Okay, this is great. Okay, I think given the time that we have left, I've kind of been looking at some of the questions, and I found one that I think addresses a couple different ones, because we've been talking about like our relationship with ChatGPT in the classroom, but I'm going to throw this question up from Sarah, and she's asking, how can you persuade tech-averse colleagues that something like ChatGPT is something that should be embraced rather than banned from a classroom? And I'll just start this with an anecdote. I saw a job presentation for a technical communication position, and a poet in the department asked a question about Eudora Welty, and the tech writer said, "Well, I don't know anything about poetry." She's like, "How can you be an English teacher if you don't know anything about Eudora Welty?" And so like this, like there are people who are just like they're like, this is the absolute no, like this is a no. How would you convince them? Like, what's your 30-second pitch to convince them? And then that's how we'll wrap up. Let's go ahead and we'll start with Ravit. What's your 30-second pitch? How convince those colleagues that it should be in the classroom?
This is a difficult question. With some of them, honestly, it is going to be impossible. Some people are so tech averse, it's never going to happen. But I think the angle I would take is you have to. This is a thing your students are using. You can close your eyes to it. Your students won't.
I would, my route to convincing faculty to do anything is to come with a truckload of resources, right? Like, can't just ask them to change their pedagogy. Can't just ask them to open their eyes to a technology. It's in your classroom whether you like it or not. All those things are true. And I think the most tech averse know this. But part of the friction is faculty development. Help me learn how to teach with it. Give me some resources to be able to change my pedagogy. So that's my short answer. And in most things, when it comes to convincing or persuading or encouraging faculty who are overworked as it is and have lots of advisees and lots of students to teach, institutions need to come with resources.
Yeah, and I would just use my 30 seconds or a brief part of my 30 seconds to sum up that agreement. There's like the ethical argument, which Ravit said, which is it's here. As educators, we have an ethical responsibility to help our students navigate this new technology. And then the practical argument, which is we also need to make sure that we're providing educators with the resources so that they can come along and be part of the solution and be part of this sort of interesting new chapter.
Ravit and Lindy and Nina, I think this conversation was everything that I wanted it to be and more. I love the conversation that we were having. I love the engagement that we're getting from the audience. There are some questions that we didn't get to, and I would like some of you who are asking these questions, I would encourage you, ask ChatGPT, just like the only thing that you can do to really understand what this thing is to play with it. Like, go figure out. I would caution you on implementation, but go and play. you have to go and play and see just really what the future looks like. And we'll see. And to Jason's point, Jason asked a question about what's going to happen when it becomes not free anymore. I think it's something that we should be talking about, or that we should be aware of, is that one of the investors of OpenAI is Microsoft, billion-dollar investor. They're going to be integrating, according to some reports, right? They're going to be integrating ChatGPT with Bing. Everybody's talking about how this is the death of Google. It might be like the resurrection of Bing as a search entity. And so it's going to be really interesting what happens over the next even 6 months, because I've heard this and I agree. I don't think that OpenAI or ChatGPT understood just how much traction they're going to get with this, and it's fascinating to see what's going on.
And Eric, I'll say
yes,
just
please, yes, the final
just
thoughts.
really quickly. I mean, this probably isn't a great thing to say at the very end, but ChatGPT is based on GPT 3.5, and apparently GPT-4 is due out sometime this year.
Yeah,
and it's been trained on, and maybe Ravit knows, like 100x times as much data. So what we are experiencing today isn't even what will be available to our students next fall.
Yeah, they're already saying, like, OpenAI is saying, you will be impressed once you see Chat GPT 4. So that's they're saying, like, you haven't seen anything yet, right? And so I hope that for all of you who are out there, please take a moment to connect with all the people who are on the panel. A lot of us are talking about these different kinds of things, and please feel free to reach out. Again, thank you so much, all of you. I'm going to go ahead and take you off the screen and just kind of close out here. Yeah,
yes,
thank you again so much.
Thank you.
Great being here.
I always feel so awkward when I boot people off the screen. It's just like this weird control power, I don't know thing. But I cannot understate what I think is the most beautiful thing about ChatGPT. And I'll say for the world, but I think for me specifically, is that I am a person who is driven by curiosity. I love asking questions, and to have something that you can ask a question and get an answer back, and then you can question that question, to me is the reason, is how we learn, right? So for all those people who are asking, like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? I mean, you critically think about it, right? And what better way to engage it than thinking about it yourself? So I hope that each and every one of you goes out and you start playing with this. You should start following this. You should start talking to your students about it, because they are already using it. And with that, everybody, I hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you.